Joining me now, Rob Bluey, who is the president of Daily Signal. Hi, Rob. How are you?
See you. Thanks for having me.
You've got a blue background, and I'm wearing a blue dress in your honor.
Well, thank you. We love the color blue in the Bluey household, that's for sure.
Is that your real last name?
Of course it is.
That's
Yes.
an amazing name.
Before the show became so popular, but yes, no, it's fantastic. The kids love the cartoon, that's for sure.
Well, welcome to Will Cain country. I want to talk about Superman first, and then we can talk about the Supreme Court decision. So, James Gunn is suffering from, being asphyxiated inside his own fart bubble in Hollywood, thinking that his politics translate to everybody's politics. And somehow you have to take what used to be reliable escapism and turn it into a political battering ram. Have people like this director, and I believe he's also the co-president of DC Studios, have they not realized that the politics and the forced messages can be off-putting to audiences?
You would think by now they would recognize that. I couldn't help but wonder if this was simply a publicity stunt to get the movie in the news. I went to the F1 movie with my kids recently. I saw the trailer for Superman. I did not get the message that James Gunn was talking about when I saw that trailer. Obviously, it was just a trailer. But I do think that the American people are tired of Hollywood dictating to them how they should think about these cultural issues. I think the American people can come to their own conclusions, and they don't need Hollywood force-feeding a message in the movie theater. And so we'll see how this goes over with audiences. I can't imagine that he's doing much good with maybe the MAGA crowd that would traditionally maybe go see a Superman movie, but maybe now turned off based on what he said.
I mean, moviegoers are turned off when they're being lectured to because it's really expensive. If you go to a movie alone, it's expensive. And the only way to get people into theaters is to make them more expensive by serving booze and high-end food that you can order and consume from your seat. So it's as expensive as going to a concert. Maybe not Taylor Swift, but, certainly the Temu Taylor Swift, also known as Katy Perry. So, these are really expensive endeavors, and that's the uphill fight that movie theater owners and, franchisees, they are fighting every single day. It's just trying to get people into the theater. They don't need headwinds. And
no, they don't.
Does James Gunn realize that he's disinviting half of the country by making these statements?
Yes, he probably does. But again, I think that they may be so desperate to draw attention to their films because, let's face it, they've spent tens of millions, if not hundreds of $millions to create these movies over the course of a number of years. Seeing the F1 movie and we stayed for the credits, seeing how many people were involved, the locations involved. I mean, I can only imagine how much it costs. So naturally, when you go to the theater, and for a family of 5 like mine, it cost well over $100 by the time you bought the tickets. You bought the popcorn, you got the drinks for the kids. I mean, that was a matinee showing. I mean, if you were to go at night, it would obviously be even more expensive. And it's no wonder that we were one of maybe a half a dozen people in the theater on opening weekend.
Wow.
I think that the American people, yes, they are suffering from the higher cost of living under 4 years of Joe Biden. They're still adjusting to that. There's obviously the post-COVID, phase that I think a lot of these movie theaters are still in. And so to have a director and producer come out and make these comments that, as you indicated, turn off half the country that is not necessarily going to be as enthusiastic to see the Superman movie, it probably is not making many theater owners very happy these days.
No, and then, the writer-director's brother, Sean Gunn, who's also an actor, came out and said, if you don't like immigrants, you don't like America. And it's like, come on, man. Like, is this really necessary? Everyone has such a negative axe to grind. And, it's like they got it so right with Top Gun Maverick. And you would think that some of these studios go, oh, I see. Like, we have to stop inserting these message characters into every single movie and being so stupidly inclusive that you can't escape when you are a part of this indoctrination. Sorry, I added too many syllables to that. I blame the lack of caffeine, Rob. I really do.
And look, I think this happened earlier this year with Snow White. I mean, there's clearly
Great
a
point.
number of examples that they have tried and failed to impose their cultural values on the American people. And I just think, frankly, after years of enduring this type of treatment, the American people have just wised up and they're just not going to show up and support the film. And it's sad because in a movie like Superman, which should feature so many great things about our culture and obviously a lot of people, myself and people who are older than me, grew up, with Superman movies and comics, and there's a number of great storylines that you could tell with the Superman character, and to make it about immigration is just baffling to me. And I think that the American people are clearly divided on the issue of legal and illegal immigration. There are those who believe we should have a legal path forward to let immigrants come to this country. But I think that there's clear consensus that having over 10 million illegal immigrants come to the country during 4 years of Joe Biden's reign.
I mean, why not?
Not a good thing.
But why not advertise like, come see Superman? He's going to win the state championship on the women's track and field team.
Right.
It would be the same thing. Or Superman, he loves performing abortions. It's hard to think of something that would be more divisive than that. But, it's like, I've always thought that people in Hollywood just assume the rest of the country feels how they feel about their politics that, is force-fed to them. And then in order to stay in the system, they force-feed it to other people with these obviously diminishing returns. And, it's like people, even if they weren't political, many of them voted for Trump because they want their country back. They want normalcy because and correct me if I'm wrong, but especially in big cities, what we're being fed is abnormal. Like, homelessness, like rampant homelessness and, illegal prostitution will be codified in New York City. And I am not against consensual acts between adults, but these type of things, open air drug markets, will be codified by Zoran Mamdani if he is elected mayor of New York City. And that was the backlash. That's why people voted for Trump, because they were voting against that. Are we more out of equilibrium than we thought we were last fall?
Well, you're seeing it in New York City. I mean, we've seen it in cities across this country. And I remember doing a series, sitting in on a series of focus group meetings prior to the 2024 election in major U.S. cities, Atlanta, Pittsburgh, I believe Milwaukee was one of them. And we consistently heard from voters who said that crime was top of mind for them because they had seen not only the consequences of having illegal immigration really wreak havoc on their cities, but just the lack of enforcement from some of these George Soros rogue prosecutors that frankly, just turn the other way when it comes to some of these crimes. We just featured an interview with Jason Miyares, who's up for re-election in Virginia as the Attorney General, and he's talked about how some of the policies in the Commonwealth of Virginia have led to all sorts of crimes being committed by individuals who are let out of prison early. So yes, there are consequences to this. I think that it's one of the reasons you've identified that Americans backed Donald Trump, probably why he was able to make some gains among Hispanic and Black voters who were just tired of the same types of policies they heard from leftist politicians year after year.
And they're also tired of being condescended to and being told that, you are expected to be dependent on the government. And so what happens is when you create that level of dependency, it doesn't fund itself. So taxes have to go up. And that's a big issue for people because when you have such overwhelming tax debt to the point where it compromises other choices you can make as an individual and as a family, that's one of the things that makes people sit up regardless of their racial makeup and ethnic background. It makes them sit up and say, I want my money back. Like, I want my choices back. And if you have a Democrat Party that's like, we're only going to make the federal government bigger, and we will demonize anyone who tries to dismantle the deep state and the size of the government and the bureaucracy, we will blow up Tesla dealerships if you try and dismantle that because we want more power, we want more control. How does that play into this 8-1 Supreme Court emergency decision that basically stayed the injunction against a U.S. district judge in California?
Yeah, well, it brings clarity, first of all. I think that it's unfortunate that it took so long. I think the American people have had a lot of whiplash between what Elon Musk was doing with Doge in the early days of the Trump administration, trying to clean out some of these bloated bureaucratic government agencies that are in desperate need of reform. We we cannot continue to spend the American people's tax dollars at the rate that we continue to do so. I mean, there are big problems, not only with the mandatory government programs, but also with some of the discretionary programs. And I think that, I do give President Trump and Elon Musk a lot of credit for trying to tackle this, despite the fact that there are entrenched interests in Washington, D.C., and apparently the federal judiciary who didn't want to see them clean house. And so the Supreme Court giving clarity to the Trump administration on this is a good thing. We will now just need to make sure that the politicians in Washington have the courage and the backbone to see it through to completion. The U.S. Senate is expected to debate the rescissions package next week. You're already hearing rumblings from some of those Republican senators. They have a 53-47 majority in the Senate. If they cannot get this through the U.S. Senate, and Kennedy, remember, this is under $10 billion. We're not talking; it's like a rounding error in the deficit. This is a significant challenge, I think, that Republicans face when they try to explain to voters some of the promises that they made about limiting government and reducing government spending.
Yeah, and if you ask, an ordinary taxpayer. So if you've got a bunch of people who work at an agency and they all do the same thing and their jobs are redundant, should we keep all of those people employed at the same time? And, the answer would be no, that seems like a waste of money. Well, that's the federal government. That is bureaucracy in action. So what this executive order was trying to do in February was give the president the ability to cull some of these redundant jobs from various federal agencies. And the judge in California said, no, I'm not going to let you do that. And that was part of the Supreme Court decision, just a couple weeks ago, which was a big win for the president, which was saying that these federal judges cannot single-handedly stop the president's agenda because they disagree with it politically. So, this was a decision back in February. The federal judge seated in California tried to stop the firings. And, it was curious that it was an 8-1 decision. Ketanji Brown Jackson, the Associate Justice on the Supreme Court, was the only one who actually wrote a very politically worded dissent saying that, President Trump is using a wrecking ball. And, it's like, I know a lot of people like, great, I wish we had a wrecking ball because the federal government is too damn big.
That's right. It is. It is definitely too big. You raised a couple of important points there. Number one, yes, Ketanji Brown Jackson couldn't even get her liberal colleagues, Sonia Sotomayor and Elena Kagan, to agree with her on this one. They sided with the conservative majority on the court. So, I mean, I think that's notable. Particularly when you have so many in the legacy media who oftentimes point to the divided court. Well, here's an example where they were pretty much overwhelmingly on the same side. As it comes to the judges who have taken matters into their own hands, the left has done a great job of venue shopping, finding judges who are going to be sympathetic to their arguments, and then having those judges impose these nationwide injunctions. Now, even though the Supreme Court curtailed that, as some of the conservative justices pointed out at the time, they will find back channels to still try to do this. And so it's not that this issue has been settled for good. I think we probably need Congress to come in there and clarify the role of the federal judiciary when it comes to these nationwide injunctions and district court judges. The Supreme Court should really be the one that's deciding for the nation whether or not what the president is doing is constitutional. And so I hope that this, again, brings clarity for what the Trump administration wants to do to clean up the administrative state to make sure that Americans' taxpayer dollars are being spent wisely at a lot of these agencies. Mm-hmm. And for many of these agencies that have come into existence decades ago and have just failed to embark on the types of reforms that are needed, you have now an executive. Think about this: if you were in a private company, you have an executive who was told by a judge that he could not manage the workforce. I mean, this is just crazy when you think about it. President Trump now has the green light to move forward with some of the changes he wants to do.
And he will, because of the coalition that he created. And, that's what is so curious to me is I think Democrats would actually put themselves in a better position if they would acknowledge the necessity for some of the stuff that he's doing. Not everything. Like, you can still be opposed to his personality. You can still be opposed to part of his philosophy. But if there are things that he's doing that actually benefit, especially working Americans, it behooves them to say, hey, good job on this. As Democrats, we will actually build on this. But they can't bring themselves to do that. And on Gutfeld last night, Greg brought up a really important point, and that's the sunk cost fallacy that a lot of these Democrats suffer from because they have been pushing back against him for so many years now. They feel like if they don't continue to push, if they acknowledge any one thing, they've wasted all their money and their political capital, when really they would just kind of reveal themselves to be fraudulent. But it's still better for them in the long run to acknowledge where it has been necessary for the president to make certain actions. And I will say this, as a libertarian, he went to the Libertarian Convention. Trump went to the Libertarian Convention last year and tried to convince people and said, like, I will pardon Ross Ulbricht. I will do it very early on in my second administration. And, he actually did some outreach, and the Libertarian Party is in a shambles. Is it time for a third party? Elon Musk is so mad at Donald Trump and, has let his ego get the best of him. And so he wants to start the America Party. Will that work? And is it time right now?
Well, Kennedy, I think it's interesting you bring up the Libertarian Party. The Libertarian Party, I think, is trying to make some overtures to Elon Musk, as are some other third parties that exist in our country, because I think they recognize he has enormous wealth and he has the ability to perhaps influence certain elections. There are a couple things. Number one, it's incredibly difficult, ballot access laws in this country for a third party to really gain the kind of momentum. But Elon Musk has indicated that he plans to do targeted races. So if he can find candidates in certain swing states or swing congressional districts, he may be able to tip the balance in his favor in those particular areas. But I was with you at my first Freedom Fest conference in Palm Springs last month. And I mean, I heard a lot of frustration on the fact that neither party is really taking the debt and deficit seriously. I know that's a big issue for libertarians and that crowd in particular. And so I'm glad that Elon Musk is focusing attention on some of these issues that go under the radar and don't necessarily get the attention in Washington, D.C. that I think they deserve. With a $37 trillion national debt in this country that comes out to $108,000 per citizen, I mean, it is a massive challenge that we need to tackle. I think Musk has identified that it poses a threat to our future prosperity in this country. And so maybe he can at least elevate certain issues, if not necessarily be successful in getting candidates into office.
And I think that's the only way you're going to do it. I think you're absolutely right about that. And that's what Spike Cohen has focused on with You Are the Power. That's his organization, is targeting smaller races. You start with city council and state legislatures and, certain mayor's races across the country, because you're not, at least right now, 2016, 2024, before Trump was almost assassinated, that was the time for a third party to come forward, because so many people were fed up with the divisive political system that we've got right now. And no one can make that happen. So on a national level, I don't think that could work. Elon Musk does have a lot of money. I don't think the Libertarian Party is in a position right now to appeal to anybody. And I'm not a member of the Libertarian Party. I never have been. I am an ideological libertarian. I want government to be as small and sleek as possible. It is so intrusive. And yes, the national debt has the potential to swallow us whole, because debt service will take up a majority of the general budget here very, very soon. And, the programs that Democrats and, current Republicans say will never be touched are headed toward insolvency. So something's got to give. Trump is doing some things right, but, like many other Republicans, they just love spending.
Well, they love spending, but I think they're also afraid to touch some of those programs like Social Security and Medicare. I mean, they probably look back to 2005 and see what happened to George W. Bush's second term and
Hmm.
how it was, derailed. Not solely because of the Social Security reforms that he attempted to pass, but clearly that energized Democrats in a way that I think it scared off some Republicans from not wanting to, pursue some of the reforms. But yes, we are warned by the trustees of both of those programs that insolvency is coming. There are, as we were just talking about with the efforts the Doge was making on some of the discretionary programs and how difficult it is to get some Republicans to go along with some of those cuts. And this is where I think you're right. I think that there probably are members of the Democrat Party, there are Republicans who would find some appeal in having a third option. But the big challenge for Elon Musk is going to be beating incumbents. Incumbents have a really good track record of winning elections. Even though Americans give Congress a poor approval rating, they tend to like their own individual member of Congress.
True.
And that's why it comes down to what? Just maybe 24 races out of 435 in the House that are going to determine control of that body. And it's even more challenging in the Senate, where you only have a third of the Senate up every year, and maybe, I don't know, 2 to 3 Senate seats that are going to determine control of that body. So it'll be interesting to see what strategy Elon Musk pursues. And this is, again, where I think that if he focuses on a core set of issues, he might be able to shift public opinion and get certain incumbent members of Congress to pay more attention to the issues that he cares about.
Has he suffered a really fatal personal implosion by aligning himself with politics? Are you surprised that he's continuing to seek a political path when it has, damaged his bottom line and the market cap of Tesla? So was this his own undoing, or is that just how nasty and corrosive our politics are?
Yeah, I'm a bit surprised that when he stepped back from the Doge effort, that I thought that he would go back to focusing on SpaceX and Tesla and his business ventures. I didn't necessarily expect him to engage in this kind of political debate that we seem to be having with President Trump and Republicans right now, particularly the dispute over the one big beautiful bill. And so I'm not sure exactly how Musk is trying to balance all of these competing interests, because you're absolutely right. He's turned off a lot of Democrats who were big Tesla consumers and purchasers of his vehicles. Now, don't necessarily have a lot of love with the MAGA crowd. And so as we started with Hollywood and some of the poor decisions that they were making, I think anytime you have business leaders engage in politics like that, there are trade-offs, and sometimes they can be incredibly popular decisions that you make, and maybe they find appeal with a certain audience, but other times, yes, there will be business consequences and perhaps not necessarily the best for the bottom line for his companies.
Yeah, and when you're in an environment where the opposition has to appeal to the unwell in order to make very loud demonstrations, like the people that are trying to jostle into action to bomb Tesla dealerships. And you also have Democrats, and off the record conversations with Axios saying, we just need someone to get shot right now. That's what we really need. We need one of those ICE agents to shoot one of our own. But, that's how irrational things are.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting because you've had now 2 Democrats, Cory Booker and Hakeem Jeffries, set records for the longest filibuster in the Senate and the House. And when asked why they would do that, they said, well, the party wants to see us fight. I don't actually think that that's what the Democrat base is looking for, as you just indicated, and as that Axios piece reported. They are looking for actual violence, which I find frightening.
Yeah.
That they would resort to that type of behavior. But we see it on the streets of Washington, D.C. There were obviously protesters out in force this week with Benjamin Netanyahu's visit. And some of the rhetoric that they were using was downright scary. And I think that it's disappointing that you have some leaders of that party who are unwilling to condemn that kind of behavior, particularly since as we're approaching the 1-year anniversary this coming Sunday of the assassination attempt on President Trump. Hopefully that's a reminder that things they can get carried away. And I don't know where it ultimately ends, but What we've seen, the attacks on Elon Musk personally and the Tesla dealerships, certainly not a good thing. And just because he's speaking out with his political views doesn't mean you need to carry it to that extreme.
No, absolutely not. And the fact that someone would go on record and say, yeah, this is what we need, because I think they're so clumsy and incompetent that they see that, it was President Trump's reaction in the moment that turned the tide of the election. And, obviously the horrible debate performance by Joe Biden didn't do him any favors, but it wasn't, by virtue of being shot. It was how he responded in the moment and put his needs aside to let the country know that no matter what, come hell or high water, he was fighting for them. Fighting for them, not fighting against them. And, Democrats are really embracing this fight against any opposition, and nothing embodies that more than progressivism. And you've seen mainstream Democrats for years now try and marginalize progressivism and say, this isn't really the Democrat Party. This is just a phase. But then you have Zoran Mamdani. He's got a better shot than anyone at being the next mayor of New York City. So what does that say about the state of progressivism and progressivism within the Democrat Party?
Yeah, you would know better the situation in New York City than me. The observations that I take away is that, number one, it was pretty low turnout. I think, 18 to 20% of voters turned out for that primary election. So I don't know how representative it was of all Democrats in the city. Even among those who supported Mamdani, it was the highly educated. I think J.D. Vance said this, the highly educated. He did not do particularly well among black voters, in particular in New York City and certain precincts. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of coalition he's able to put together in the general election, particularly as he goes up against the incumbent mayor, Eric Adams. But definitely there is enthusiasm on the left for those individuals who are pursuing more progressive or socialist policies. And it's scary. Think how close Bernie Sanders got to becoming the Democrat nominee in 2020. If it weren't for James Clyburn and some last-ditch efforts in South Carolina.
Exactly right.
Right. Bernie Sanders may well have been the one that was going up against Donald Trump, and who knows what we see. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, another example, who I think is solidified her place as a leader in the party and maybe even a candidate for president in 3.5 years. And so it's really interesting to see the left pivot in this direction when you have so many individuals, when they just look at the attitudes of the American people, to say, no, this is not what the American people want. This is certainly not what independent voters want. They want to see common sense solutions, not a hard pivot to the left.
All right. Well, Rob Bluey, thank you so much for your time. President of the Daily Signal. You are a phenomenal thinker, a wonderful writer, and I really appreciate you taking the time on Will Cain Country.
Thanks, Kennedy. Great to see you today.
Have a beautiful day.